Hi, I'm Kevin Zimmerman, and welcome to Unlocking Black History. Today, we're going to evaluate three primary questions that should be asked when evaluating two fundamental elements of American history. The questions that every American should be asking, especially if you are a Black American, when it comes to these two fundamental elements of American history, is this: one, what was written? Two, who wrote it? And three, what were the circumstances that surrounded the one that wrote it? Now, what two fundamental principles are we talking about here? The first one is the Declaration of Independence. The second fundamental principle we're looking at, or second fundamental element, I'm sorry, not principles, but fundamental elements. The second one is the Star-Spangled Banner. So the first fundamental element is the Declaration of Independence. The second element is the Star-Spangled Banner. This weekend, I heard an interview that was done by Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Project. And she was talking to Joy Reid about a book that she had just read. And the book is called The Nation That Never Was, Reconstructing America's Story by Kermit Roosevelt III. And in this book, the theologian or the historian of this book is affirming that it is his belief that the climate that we are seeing today is in agreement with the founding fathers. That statement was made, and it made me raise my eyebrows until I took something into consideration. When we look at the founding fathers, many of our founding fathers operated within, accepted, and helped sustain a worldview that white people are at the top of social hierarchy. Once again, when we look at the founding fathers, we cannot deny that they helped establish the world view that white Americans were, or white people, especially from European descent, should be atop of the social hierarchy. So when we take a look at that, we're going to break down the two fundamental elements. And we should, because when you think about it, when it comes to the Declaration of Independence and the Star-Spangled Banner, we are taught both these things as early as the second grade, as a matter of fact. And here, the Star Spangled Banner is something that America adopted as its national anthem, its theme song. So, with that being said, we're going to start with the Declaration of Independence. Okay, let's start there. And when we start at the Declaration of Independence, we all know what it says. And it says this: that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. That amongst these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that's what it says. That's the Declaration of Independence, which then brings us to the second question. Then who wrote it? The Declaration of Independence had five authors. It was Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. But the primary author of the Declaration of Independence is Thomas Jefferson, the largest picture that we see here of the five authors. He himself was the primary author of that. So it brings us to then the third question that we must ask on the first principle. The first element, fundamental element. Remember, the first one was what was written when we looked at the Declaration of Independence. Then the second question, who wrote it? And now we're at the third. Well, what were the circumstances that surrounded who wrote it? When we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, we're talking about someone who enslaved people 12 years prior to penning the Declaration of Independence. Then he was enslaving people while during the time he was penning the Declaration of Independence. And Thomas Jefferson continued to enslave people throughout the duration of his lifetime after he penned the Declaration of Independence. So, once again, he enslaved people 12 years prior to penning the Declaration of Independence. He was enslaving people during the time while he was penning the Declaration of Independence. And finally, he enslaved people throughout the duration of his lifetime after he penned the Declaration of Independence. So this addresses a argument that we consistently have in our American society regarding Black citizens when it comes to the words in the Declaration of Independence. So our conclusion is this. Well, I don't want to speak universally. Some may see different, but a large number of Black Americans like myself come to these two conclusions. One, either the statement was a lie and they didn't believe it themselves, or two, the intent was meant to exclude the Black race. Once again, there's only one of two conclusions that we can come to. If he owned slaves 12 years prior to penning the Declaration of Independence, if he enslaved people, Black people, while penning the Declaration of Independence, and he continued to enslave people throughout the duration of his lifetime after he penned the Declaration of Independence, that suggests that we can legitimately come to one of two conclusions. Either the words that all men were created equal was a lie, they knew it was a lie, and they didn't believe that themselves, or two, the intent was meant to deliberately exclude the Black race. So, why would we anchor ourselves on just those two conclusions? I'll tell you why. There is no record recorded anywhere where Thomas Jefferson chose to change places with an enslaved person in the field. Nowhere. If he believed that all men were created equal, at no time do we have a record of Thomas Jefferson going out into the field and saying to one of the enslaved, hey, you and I today are going to switch places. You're going to go in the house, and everyone on this property will yield to your beck and call and command. By the way, while you're there, and I'm going to take your place out here in the field. Then Thomas Jefferson turns to the um, foreman overseeing the enslaved in the field, and then there's nothing showing that he looked at him and said, "At any time that you feel that I'm getting behind on my count in my production, you could take that whip that's in your hand and beat me to your heart's desire," as an example to the other enslaved that are within sight of you whooping me with this whip, that it is in their best interest to meet their quota. Nor did he look at the enslaved and say, while you're in the house, if you desire to get physically involved with my wife, Martha, go right ahead, man. Have your way. And by the way, if you desire to impregnate our daughters, all men are created equal here. So you have access to do whatever you will with my wife. You can do whatever you will with my daughters if you so desire. So since we don't have any documentation of him exchanging places with the enslaved, we don't have any documentation of him being willing to put himself in a different position other than being the ultimate white supremacist here. There's only one of two conclusions that I would argue, that we would argue. And that's one, either they didn't believe it when they wrote it, or two, there was no intent when the Declaration of Independence was written that Black Americans were included in that statement. Now, let's go to the second fundamental element, the Star-Spangled Banner. We're going to take a look at that, the Star-Spangled Banner here. And we're going to ask ourselves the first question: what does it say? Okay. And we all know it. The Star-Spangled Banner says, "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Or the land of the free and the home of the brave." Once again, as you're closing out the song, it says, "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Or the land of the free and the home of the brave." Now that's what it says. And we know that the Star-Spangled Banner was designated to be the U.S. national anthem in 1931 by President Herbert Hoover. But here's what I find interesting, and I know many of us will never, ever forget the kneeling of Colin Kaepernick at the time that he sought to take his position and his platform to bring awareness to the over-policing of the Black communities. And when Colin Kaepernick kneeled, it created a national outrage. And I know we've talked about these things in some of my past live streams before, but today I want to hone in here on the three fundamental questions that should be asked about the two fundamental elements of American history, and I'm just focusing solely on those things. But back to Colin Kaepernick. I will never forget the outrage, and I will never forget what I often heard, and that was this: how could he disrespect the American flag like that? And I mean America, some Americans, those that really cling to what they consider to be patriotism, lost their minds. We can't stand for this. We can't allow for him, who was given an opportunity to be a professional athlete, and he is going to come forward and disrespect the American flag like that on national television, where this is going to be viewed around the world. But here's the irony in all of this. When you ask yourself, who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner? Because when you ask yourself who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, it brings us to Francis Scott Key. Now, America didn't like the idea that an American citizen, especially a Black American citizen, not render what they considered homage to the American flag and the playing of the national anthem. But at no time is it taken into consideration who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. So we have to consider the third question. That brings us to the third question. What are the circumstances surrounding who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner? And when we ask ourselves that question, isn't it amazing how America continues to overlook the fact that the Star-Spangled Banner was written by a racist bigot who owned slaves? Yes, Francis Scott Key was enslaving people at the time that he was writing the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay? And we overlook the idea that the song omits the third stanza that reads this: there will be no refuge could save the hireling and slave. So who is that referring to? Black people that have been enslaved. But let me just read it in its entirety. The third stanza, which has been removed from the national anthem, written by a racist bigot, the author, Francis Scott Key, says, no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave. So when we look at the words that this racist bigot penned at a time that he enslaved people while writing this song that America adopted as its national anthem, why aren't we entertaining why those slaves were fleeing. And he's referring to the black enslaved people who joined the side of the British to fight for their freedom. They were willing to, if you are willing to grant us our freedom, we'll take the risk to fight on your side. Mind you, an opportunity that the Americas did not give them because they were under the institution of chattel slavery that left no escape from a lifetime commitment to being enslaved. But because they chose the possibility of freedom by fighting for the British against the Americas, who would not give them an opportunity to have freedom whatsoever, he boldly writes what has been excluded from the Star-Spangled Banner that we sing today, that was written by a racist bigot. Yes. So, who is then? What were the circumstances that surrounded Francis Scott Key? What was the circumstances? Well, one, we've covered it already. We know that Francis Scott Key was a racist bigot who wrote that third stanza that ironically was removed from the national anthem that was adopted in 1931. Interesting how we whitewash things to make ourselves look so good. Nevertheless, Francis Scott Key was so much against the liberty of Black people that he even used his profession as a lawyer to argue against abolitionists. So he was anti-abolition. But yet, here we are, while you're so angry at the idea that a Black person or anybody would take the position of not honoring a flag who you meaning the people that share that ideology, believe that that flag and that song means more than the people it represents. Or, here's another question. Does it? Does it? Does that song represent the people who you intended as, or who you were considering when those words were written, or the land of the free? Who are you referring to? And the home of the brave, because we know that the free were white people, white citizens. Black people were enslaved. And your third stanza reminds us that you would hunt them down and there would be no escape because they chose to fight with the British, who offered them the freedom from enslavement that you yourself wouldn't give them. Why isn't America focused on that? Why are we constantly focused on the patriotism that we consistently speak of? But having said that, I take you back to where we started. Anytime you look at the two fundamental elements of the United States, which is the Declaration of Independence that says all men are created equal, and the Star-Spangled Banner that says, or the land of the free, the home of the brave, you would be amiss by asking the three basic questions. One, what does the statement or the document say? Two, who wrote it? Three, what were the circumstances surrounding the one that wrote it? In each case, when we look at the Declaration of Independence and we look at the Star-Spangled Banner, we see a commonality here. The word white remains silent because you can't believe that all men are created equal when one, you didn't see blacks as human, so they were excluded, or you believed it was a lie from the beginning. And two, when you write, or the land of the free, when you yourselves owned slaves while you were penning the Star-Spangled Banner. We ask these same questions when we see policies that are being written today, when we see the rolling back of civil rights acts that our ancestors and forefathers have fought for just to gain basic equality. When we see the voter suppression that is constantly being enforced. And I used it 1,000 times and I'll use it another 1,000 times again. The state of Texas, mind you, which is a Confederate state that broke itself from the Union because it wanted to contain and maintain the institution of slavery, while it consistently claims that slavery wasn't the reason that it succeeded and fought with the Confederacy against the Union, but what they were defending, the way of the South. But the way of the South was the institution of chattel slavery. And here in the state of Texas, 2026, we saw where a racially gerrymandered map was allowed to go forward in order to give those who are primarily against equal rights and civil rights the advantage to be elected into office so that they can make the determination of who gets access to resources and opportunity. So when we consider these things, when we look at these things, we are no longer going to whitewash history here. I hope I have left you with something to take into consideration. And after you ask yourself the question, you make your own conclusion, but no longer just buy into reciting the Declaration of Independence because we're told to, or standing when the national anthem is being played and removing your hand and putting your right hand over your heart, which, by the way, for years I did that. For years I did that until I got to the place that I start researching things in depth. And then I came to my own conclusion. I'm asking you to take into consideration the information that I've shared here with you today, and you come to your own conclusion. Are we living a lie, or is it time that we unlock Black history? Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.